Okay, welcome back. We're going to cover several paragraphs in this session. We're actually going to cover paragraphs 11 through 16. Okay, paragraph 11, special provisions. Let me read this one. It's pretty short and important. Insert only factual statements and business details applicable to the sale. TREC rules prohibit licensee from adding factual statements or business details for which a contract addendum, lease, or other form has been promulgated by TREC for mandatory use. You should be very careful about using this paragraph. A lot of agents get into trouble by what they write in here and the language they use, some of the words that they've heard, and basically what it comes down to is they're investigated for practicing law without a license by TREC. Another thing that you need to be careful of is don't write something in there where there's a TREC promulgated form that covers that situation. So you'll sometimes see that they'll put in there that this contract is contingent upon the buyer selling their current house, where there's a TREC promulgated form for that. So you wouldn't want to put that kind of language in here, or something to the effect that the buyer is going to lease the house 2 days before the closing date. There's a promulgated temporary lease that would handle that. Another thing agents will get in trouble using this paragraph is not having consequences or having wrong consequences if something doesn't happen. Like you'll see sometimes that they'll say that the house must appraise for sales price, and that's it. Or what? What's going to happen if it doesn't? So there's no consequences. So be very careful if you're have a situation where it's very unique and you need to put something in there and you don't know the exact wording. You can get with me. I can get with our attorney and have her draft something for you. So please be careful with that. Paragraph 12 talks about settlement and other expenses. This is the paragraph where the buyer is asking the seller to pay some of their closing costs. There's a blank line in there, and you just fill in how much you're asking the seller to pay. Now, you need to be careful not to ask for too much. A good idea is to check with the buyer's lender, see how much they would authorize as far as the seller paying the buyer's closing costs. If you ask for too much and it's not used, they're not going to refund that money to the buyer, and you may have left some money on the table. And then it goes on to explain what the different closing costs are, so you can kind of read that. There's nothing, it's just reading it and understanding what the different costs are. All right, paragraph 13 talks about prorations. Typically what you'll see the most is taxes are prorated. Taxes are prorated through the closing date because taxes are paid in arrears. So if you have a house, you've lived in the house for 6 months and 8 days, you owe some taxes, you just haven't been billed for them yet. You're going to get billed for them later on in the year. So the title company is going to use the most current information they have. They will prorate the taxes through the day of closing. It goes on to say that if the tax bill wasn't right and there's taxes that were owed or taxes were overpaid, then the buyer and the seller can take care of that and finalize that after the bills are come out in October. So paragraph 14 talks about casualty loss. I want to read this one to you. It's a little lengthy, but I think it's a pretty good idea that you understand what's going on here in case you have a situation where the property is damaged somehow prior to closing, and what are the recourses for the buyer and the seller. The house catches on fire, a big tree falls on the house, there's some type of casualty or loss. If any part of the property is damaged or destroyed by fire or other casualty after the effective date of the contract, the seller shall restore the property to its previous condition as soon as reasonably possible, but in any event, by the closing date. If the seller fails to do so, due to factors beyond the seller's control, the buyer may, and here's the buyer's choices, Terminate this contract and the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. B, extend the time for performance up to 15 days and the closing date will be extended as necessary. And then C, accept the property in its damaged condition with an assignment of insurance proceeds and receive credit from the seller at closing in the amount of the deductible under the insurance policy. The seller's obligation under this paragraph are independent of any other obligation of the seller under the contract. So you probably don't hopefully see it that often, but if there is a damage to the property, a fire or some other kind of casualty, those are the recourses for the buyer. Paragraph 15 talks about default. Let's go ahead and read this one also. If the buyer fails to comply with the contract, the buyer will be in default and the seller may A, enforce specific performance, seek such other relief as may be provided by law, or both. Or B, terminate this contract, receive the earnest money as liquidating damages, thereby releasing both parties from the contract. If the seller fails to comply with the contract, the seller may be in default and the buyer may A, enforce specific performance, seek such other relief as may be provided by law, or both, or B, terminate this contract, receive the earnest money, thereby releasing both parties from the contract. So if you're not going to close, if somebody's in default and you represent the party that possibly is in default, a good idea is to refer them to this paragraph 15. Don't interpret it, just say read paragraph 15 and go see a real estate attorney. Mediation. Okay, mediation is a form of dispute resolution. Mediation is not binding, so the courts of Texas like for people to try to mediate before they start suing each other. So what happens if you get into a lawsuit before or it closes, after it closes, or if it never closes? Then typically what you would do is the buyer and the seller would agree on who the mediator is going to be. They would pay the mediator would come in, listen to both sides of the story, and then make their decision. Their decision is not binding, but it's sometimes the courts would look at that, and if they decide to go ahead and file suit and say, well, here's what the mediator thought, and it's probably what I think also, so this is what we're going to do. Another form of dispute resolution is arbitration. This is where you would hire an arbitrator. It's not a court of law, but the arbitrator listens to both sides of the story. They make a decision, and this decision is binding. And then, of course, the third kind of dispute resolution would be to go to court and sue each other. Okay. Now, most of the time, new home builders, the bigger ones, will not agree to mediation. They will arbitrate, and their contract usually states that. So if you use a new home builder's contract, it's probably stated in there that if there's some kind of dispute, that they would go to arbitration, but that's it, okay? Because arbitration is binding, and the home builders have taken the attitude that, hey, you're not going to like what the mediator says anyway, so why go through all that, pay for a mediator, and you're going to go ahead and sue us anyway. All right, that's paragraph 11 through 16. We're going to wrap this up on the next session. We're going to cover paragraph 17 all the way through the end of the contract, and then we'll also cover page 9, which is called the courtesy page. Thank you for your participation.